Good evening and welcome to Integrative Family Medicine of Asheville's Community Class Series. We believe that healthcare can be done differently, and we are committed to giving back to the community. Our health-related panel discussions and community classes like this one are free to integrative life and community and employee health plan members, as well as the community at large. Any donations received for this event will be collected and combined with profits from supplements sold through our clinic and donated to a local nonprofit beneficiary. Our team of holistic, integrative practitioners are dedicated to helping you lead a happy, healthy, integrated life. If you are interested in learning more about our affordable member-based practice, please feel free to talk to me after this discussion. We would also like to thank the Western North Carolina AIDS Project for their generous donation of condoms and dental dams and more that are free and over there for anybody who's attending in person. And without further ado, I would love to introduce our beautiful and incredibly well-informed speakers. Thank you so much for both being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Dr. Susie Gronsky has over a decade of experience in men's pelvic and sexual health and is a licensed doctor of physical therapy, certified pelvic rehabilitation practitioner, AASECT certified sexuality counselor and educator, and owner of a multidisciplinary men's pelvic health clinic in Asheville, North Carolina.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Faith Lowe is a somatic sex, love, and relationship coach based in Asheville, North Carolina. She helps her clients connect deeply to the eros, wisdom, and enchantment of their bodies. In May of 2022, she was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And since then, she has been adding pleasure as a healing modality to help her and her clients thrive and enjoy life. Faith is here to normalize the conversation about sexuality, aging, illness, and desire. So thank you both for being here. You know, before we dive into the questions that we're going to be exploring a little later on, I was curious if you both would be willing to share a little of your personal stories. And as you come in, welcome, have a seat. Yeah. Dr. Gronsky, would you be willing to start off with kind of what personal background brought you into this work?
That's a great question. My work started when I noticed there was a huge gap in care for men's pelvic and sexual health. So as a predominantly gynocentric and female-identified profession, pelvic therapy first stemmed from as women's health. And as I began my career, men were reaching out to me asking, could I help them with similar issues? And so through the graciousness and the courage of these men, I decided to be an advocate and a voice in this space. And so that's where my passion started and stemmed from.
Thank you for sharing. What about for you, Faith? What brought you into this?
Yeah, so for me, diving into the realm of sexuality professionally started with my own journey, my own crisis of like, oh my gosh, I'm married, we just had a baby, and where did our sex life go? And why is it non-existent? And I have this creature inside of me that's ravenous, and how do I get her fed? And so that was sort of the genesis of me exploring what this world can do for us in terms of feeding us in our whole lives and adding sexual wellness into that entire pie of general wellness, you know. And that was the genesis. The story is long and wonderful, but that's the beginning.
But coming from a place of your own personal experiences.
Right.
Yeah?
And diving in and taking trainings and then learning, oh my gosh, this is something that people do for a living and you can support people professionally in this. And I'm not the only one struggling with this. Yeah.
I think for both of you, there's a niche of needs not being met in the medical system and just in our culture.
Yeah.
And even just the conversation about sexuality can be so awkward. How can people feel more comfortable about talking about sex? I think that's a good first question, just to break the ice.
Yeah.
Oh,
can I start with that one?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Well, I think it's really normal to be uncomfortable talking about sex and sexuality. And I'm going to start making eye contact with the room too, not just hello, everybody, and hello, everybody. And all of us carry shame to varying degrees around this topic. And it can be a huge hindrance. And shame thrives in darkness and avoidance. And so the beginning of being comfortable talking about sex and sexuality, if that's not something that we currently are comfortable with, is acknowledging the shame and befriending the shame, which might sound a little strange, but allowing the shame to be felt in our bodies and not pushed away. Like, it's okay for us to feel it, acknowledge it. And then when it's in the light and seen, it can breathe and it ends up melting and something else can take its place. So that's just the beginning of it. Yeah.
Bring it into the light, acknowledge.
Yeah.
And that creates a
Yeah.
shift.
Yeah. Stop avoiding it in a safe way, in a way that's not just like an avalanche of shame. Like, okay, now I have to feel my shame and I'm going to be bombarded by it. But little by little, to be able to learn to feel it and to acknowledge it. And like, oh yeah, I feel scared to talk about this. I was raised Catholic, and in my family, sex was bad until marriage, and then it became good. And I don't know how to change. I don't know how to like transition from one cultural set of beliefs to another.
Yeah.
And acknowledging it is the first step.
Thank you. What about for you, Dr. Susie? What do you add?
What comes to mind is a 1999 national US survey that was done for, amongst men and women in the country. And almost 80% of them felt too embarrassed or anxious to talk about or bring up sexual concerns with their doctor. They were afraid that their doctor would misconstrue maybe the questions being asked, or that they would embarrass their physician or their doctor asking. And a good majority of them also thought that there could be nothing done for their sexual health concerns that they were bringing up or would potentially bring up to a doctor or provider. So for me, that says, how can the medical community bring up topics of sex in a casual conversational style to normalize and offer permission for individuals to address and ask such very intimate and vulnerable questions? So I think as a medical provider in these spaces, I take it upon myself to be the one to allow that space for these conversations to occur.
Thank you. I would imagine that if they redid that study from 1999, it might still come with similar results.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so shedding light, acknowledgement, and then also as a medical establishment, creating an invitation and a space for these conversations to take place, and kind of giving permission through bringing it up in casual conversation. Thank you. You know, it's interesting because the next question I have is about shame, and that a lot of people do feel shame and inhibitions when it comes to their sexuality. And if they know that, but don't want it to be that way, yet don't know how to change it, you know, in addition to acknowledgement, or maybe even could you dive in a little bit further to how to go through the process of letting go of that shame?
It would look very different for both of us.
I think there's a lot of overlap, but also, I think my lens of perspective might be,
Which is great. Yeah, no, we're gonna get different perspectives.
Yeah.
In my space, so as a sexuality counselor, neurological physical therapist, shame and embarrassment are really big elephants in the room when men even just make that call to talk about their concerns. So I'm very familiar with the themes of shame, of guilt, of embarrassment in these spaces. And so the first thing for me is to just normalize for them, like, hey, you're not alone. There's a lot of people in your situation that have similar questions or similar concerns. And if there's hope, and we can talk about that, you know, to whatever degree that you'd like to disclose. So of course, offering permission, but also standardizing and normalizing the conversation is going to help maybe quell a little bit of that perceived shame and embarrassment that they might be feeling around what is going on the inside. Other things too of supporting individuals include not being afraid of the shame feeling, but acknowledging it, as you were saying, Faith. Let's acknowledge that these feelings are very intertwined in our experiences. They're shaped by our experiences and our backgrounds, and that they're okay to be with and sit with, even though it's uncomfortable. So as a medical provider, from my perspective, the skill is really to hold that space and not be afraid to allow that person to express themselves in whatever way, in whatever capacity at that time that they're able and available to. So, you know, we don't want to hide it or say, well, you shouldn't be ashamed of that, or there's nothing to be embarrassed of. because that then minimizes really what's going on for them as an expressive way of saying, like, this is really hard to talk about, and I'm just laying it out there. So that's my perspective of kind of working with shame, embarrassment.
So both internally, maybe not minimizing it and saying, oh, it's not a big deal, let me not talk about this. And then also externally in a partnership or in a medical setting, if you're a practitioner, being respectful. Okay. What about for you, Faye? What would you say to that?
Well, I really like everything that you said. That was a really beautiful foundation to lay. And I was, oh yeah, definitely, right on. And to add to that, what I would say is, I think that the shame, it comes into our lives, into our bodies as a protective mechanism because we want to belong. Like it's there for a reason. It's not random that we're feeling shame about our sexuality. And so when the shame comes up, it's important to be able to meet it with the thing that it was afraid, like acknowledging, like, okay, so what are you afraid is going to happen if we talk about whatever the thing is that you're ashamed of? And then you can kind of like unwrap this knot. Often shame, like it's living in the shadows and it's this complex knot. But if we bring it into the light and we start to be curious about it, we learn, oh, okay, so you're scared that everybody's going to like eject you from the family or from the church or from this marriage if we really knew what was going on. And to be able to bring love, like truly the energy of love and acceptance to that which was before blocked with shame is profound. It's a profoundly healing experience to be able to acknowledge parts of ourselves that we've been cut off to and feeling like, oh, I can't show that to the world or to my partner because they will just reject me, and bring it forward and to begin by not rejecting ourselves and bringing that sense of, oh, it's okay to feel this way. It makes sense that you feel this way. And again, that brings breath and connection to shame. And when we connect to shame, it dissolves. It's the isolation and sort of like the elephant, it's that thing that we're not going to talk about that keeps it alive and well. But once it's connected and integrated, that's where the healing happens. And that's where other things get to emerge on its heels.
That right there, I think is huge as well. Perhaps that when sensuality senses, when we're trying not to connect to a part of our feelings or our senses, how does that block other aspects from coming through? So by being curious about the shame, by acknowledging it, by giving it space, it can change. And
well, I mean, I think it's an interesting point that you bring up. And I often hear it said, like, to the extent that you can feel your pain, that's how much joy you're going to feel. That's your capacity. And so when we have these emotions, if we're muting some of them, we're muting all of them.
Yeah.
And so when it's a strange thing to think, but like when we can actually elevate our ability to feel shame and tolerate what it feels like to feel shame and embarrassment in our bodies, we're actually also elevating our ability to feel bliss and pleasure and joy
and intimacy.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you wouldn't necessarily think like, oh, shame, I can, like, let's feel some shame today. But it does have some transformative benefits to it.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you have anything to add?
I would say even implicitly, like social culturally, that shame is projected onto us. So the feeling that we're feeling of shame is because for some narrative, some script that wasn't ours to begin with there's an expectation around that, or some role or some projection from the outside that we feel we're different from, or like different or not normal, right? And so that's going to bring up a lot of the insecurity. And again, I go back to, if we could just have more conversations like these and normalize the diversity of sexuality and preferences and uniqueness to each individual without othering people, I think that would really minimize these feelings of shame that are really intertwined in our culture, to be honest.
Well said.
Shame thrives in darkness was what you said. And that comes back around to that when we can't talk about these subjects, then we can't normalize them. To pivot a little bit from shame and acknowledgement and comfort with sexuality, I would love it if we could explore what are the essential aspects of anatomy, of sexual anatomy and function that are often overlooked in traditional sex education. I see you. Do you want to go ahead and start? Basket.
Which one's gonna make a debut first? Oh my goodness, y'all. Okay. So, I bring to you some models, and I know, Faith, you have.
I love that ours are.
Vulva
These are like these kind of exemplify the difference in our practices and the
It's
similarities.
the yin and the yang.
I love
Yeah.
it. I
Mhm.
absolutely love it.
It truly is, but don't you worry. Here
Oh.
I have a friend, the vulva puppet as well. Oh, you have to have
There's
both.
two vulva puppets on the same stage.
Yeah, you know it's at the top when.
Yeah.
And to talk about sexual anatomy, no one is the same. Just like a fingerprint, all parts of sexual anatomy are different and unique to the individual, which also means there is no normal, right? Like there's so much pressure around what normal is, or how big things should be or not, or how low they should hang, or the color. I mean, there's so much diversity to our anatomy, just like our personalities and our thumbprints. So yeah, I get this question asked a lot, what's normal? It's like what you have. What you have is very
I
normal.
love that.
Whatever that is.
Well, whatever that
Oh my
is.
gosh,
Right,
that's
exactly.
Honestly, I think that is overlooked in sex education. Just that.
Yeah,
What-
yeah. You can get sex education,
Uh-huh.
formal education, because in this country, it doesn't even have to be medically accurate from state to state. So the education that you are getting isn't even necessarily maybe perhaps accurate medically. So we'll just start with that.
Fair.
So that in and of itself, I think, is an eye opener. Was for me of how atrocious that really is. Like, what a disservice to our world to not have medically accurate sex education, so that we can make sound decisions. Like, if we can educate our community about sexuality and talk about things and not shun them, we are better educated to make decisions for ourselves that might be more beneficial and healthier and open, and also respectful of others. I mean, that's just the stuff they're not teaching. But
I want to add to that, since we're down this wormhole of education.
I'll bring us back in a minute.
Okay. I would love for there to be layers within sex education in age appropriate ways.
Yeah.
Education about pleasure, self-pleasure, consent, like knowing our own bodies and when our bodies say yes, what it feels like when our bodies say maybe, what it feels like when our bodies say no, and how to communicate a no, and how to have the confidence that when we feel maybe, it's a no. We're going to table it till next time. You know, next time might be 5 minutes from now. But these are things that are important for us to learn how to do that are grossly lacking in.
And sometimes important to learn as adults. Like, what are the shade?
Yeah, it's
what's
not too
what's
late.
the shade of yes to maybe to no?
That's right. That's right. Like,
What else do you think is overlooked in sexual education? I'm going to bring us back.
we're taught how to eat and walk and write and drive a car and do all these basic activities of daily life. But the one that is, well, the part of the body that's often overlooked is what you use every day: pooping, peeing, and sex. This is a vital aspect of our everyday experiences, but yet we're so disconnected with this part of our body. I just find that so odd that there isn't that a level of education around our sexuality and sexual anatomy and sexual education from that perspective. Like, I just think it's.
What would you add
absurd.
then? But let's dive into what you want to add to the conversation that feels overlooked.
Oh, right. So, thank you. Just bring me on track. So first, it's just overall general anatomy. Like, what is, how do these parts work and function? What is all entailed into our urogenital aspects of our bodies? So here I have a male identified pelvis, and you can see that the two bony parts is, if you put your hands on your hips, you're going to feel some bony prominence. That is the wings of the ilia. In the back, you have your sacrum, and then your whole spinal column sits on top of that with the spinal cord. And then in the front, you have your abdominal muscles and the pubic bone, and then the genitals are here. So the genitals for both men and women, they're they're just organized differently, but the parts are the same. And I'm going to go over that a little bit. So you have a set of muscles that you can see in between the butt bones. So the bony parts of the butt that you're sitting on are called the ischial tuberosities or your sits bones. Everything in the middle is called the perineum. The perineum, the scrotum, the full scrotum isn't here, but you have the scrotum, the genitals, the muscles, the nerves, and the anus. And all of these structures together help to support the urogenital area in the pelvis. Now, if we were to look inside the pelvis, don't try this at home.
She said don't try this at home for anybody who couldn't hear that.
So if we were to look inside the pelvis again, this is more of like a sagittal view, or if we cut you in half and opened you like a book, we're looking on the inside. So again, that sacrum or the spinal column, the bladder, prostate, and rectum, or if you have a female body, you'll see here bladder, a uterus, and the rectum. And the pelvic floor muscles here supporting the pelvic structures, and the pelvic muscles themselves help to keep you continent and dry. They also aid in defecation and urination, so your ability to poop and pee. And they aid in sexual function and appreciation, because these nerves and muscles that communicate in this area also aid in your appreciation of orgasm and pleasure. So they're sensory. There's nerves here that pick up on certain sensations, genital touch. So yeah, so that's the male pelvis overview. And then just for comparison's sake, you have here a female pelvis. And again, just organized differently. And I think Emily Nagoski, who wrote Come As You Are, she's a sex therapist or sexologist. Sorry for misspeaking. But she wrote a book, Come As You Are. And she's the one that mentioned that our parts are the same, just organized differently. So here you have the same orientation. Everything in the middle is basically the perineum. You have the clitoris, the clitoral hood. The clitoris is actually much more than the little... yes, there's much more than just the little glands, which is homologous or similar to the glands of the penis. Okay, and both structures are pieces of erectile tissue. So that erectile tissue live within the labia, and they live right in the labia, between the labia minor, the small lips, and the large lips. And so you can see it designated here in blue, but Faith has a really nice blown up version of what that looks like. Yeah. So for the erectile tissue for men are 3 pieces of tissue. Same thing for women as well. 3 pieces of tissue, the crura that wrap around the vaginal opening as well. And again, they act in very similar ways, just like erectile tissue would. And also during climax or ejaculation, these structures squeeze and relax, engorge, fill with blood, get very sensitive. Again, very similar between men and women. The difference is that men have a more visual experience associated with what they're identifying with their climax or orgasm. But you can orgasm without having ejaculation in men. So that's something that men often are like, what? Does that really happen? It's like, yeah, but oftentimes it's parallel with the physiological reflex of having an erection and ejaculation. But orgasm is a subjective, personal peak moment of pleasure. You can have many moments of pleasure in your sexual experience without actually ejaculating at all. So
Can I add
having
something?
an erection for that matter? Yeah. Would you?
Yeah. No. I love this conversation. And one thing that's interesting about talking about this from a physiological and anatomical perspective is that the clitoris is filled with nerve endings, like thousands, like 7,000 or 8,000 nerve endings. And so this is the most sensitive part of the woman's genitals. And most women do not climax just with penetration alone. And to sort of give an analogy of why that is, the inside of the vagina has less nerve endings, and similar to perhaps a man's testicles. So if you can imagine like trying to get a man off just by touching his testicles, you might be able to get some off, but most men you won't.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be able to touch the part that has the most nerve endings. And so this idea that, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with me because I can't have an orgasm during sex. There's absolutely nothing wrong with you. The clitoris is in many ways the star, and knowing that she's like big and bigger than just what we see that comes out from the hood matters, and knowing that it takes women about 40 minutes, give or take, to fully engorge, to be able to get to that full place of arousal. And that matters too, to normalize that we're different. And again, everybody's different. Some women might take 5 minutes. Like, I'm not trying to say everybody's the same, because we're definitely not. But I thought that was kind of fascinating, that idea of like, well, would you just touch a man's testicles and expect him to take it off? No. So it's the same for a woman.
Exactly, right. And again, respecting the preferences of folks and like how they want to be touched. But to your point, yeah, the coronal ridge, the glands, the frenulum, maybe somewhere along the shaft. And this is taken from survey research studies as well, of where the most sensitive, whether circumcised or not, the most sensitive areas of a man's penis are going to be somewhere around here. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only erotic area of their body. Because again, you just getting an erection again, or experience some sort of arousal or genital arousal isn't just because due to touching itself. You can have arousal just from erotic thoughts, touching other parts of your body. Anything that's going to help you experience pleasure and safety in your body is going to help with your arousal. And there's this misconception that the sexual response cycle is linear. Very much so linear, like desire, arousal, plateau, climax, and then resolution. At least that's how we rudimentarily learned it in sexuality school. But it's not like that. In fact, it has a lot to do with what's happening contextually, relationally, what's going on with other areas of your health, how you feel about yourself at any given moment, how tired you are, right? So there are many misconceptions around. There's different gender sex expectations, I would say, for both men and women. And because my focus or emphasis is more on men, their expectation is generally, well, you should have an erection ready to go at any time. Doesn't matter what's going on. The house could be burning down. You're still ready. That's misguided. That's not true at all. That is a huge myth. And very so, men are like, if I'm tired, if I'm stressed, their sexual motivation and appetite is going to be diminished, just like anybody else. Like it takes a lot of energy, physiological energy, to build arousal, to even have desire and then build arousal. Heart rate has to increase, muscle tension has to increase, your focus, your attention, your concentration has to be in it, your mindfulness. Like there's so much physical energy that even goes into the arousal state, that if you're just gas and have no more fuel in your tank, there's not going to be any room left to engage in anything sensual or erotic or sexual. So it's completely understandable that things might not be as optimal or ideal, but we have to take that into consideration. So not just the physical anatomy, but who inhabits and lives with that anatomy and what else is going on in their life that might be impacting their sexual function or their experience of pleasure.
Both arousal and sexual function are influenced by other things happening physiologically.
Yeah,
any other physiological influences that the two of you are aware of that really impact sexual arousal and sexual function that you want to mention before we move on?
I feel good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So, you as well?
I know you could go on for hours.
I was going to say, was there anything else you wanted to say?
Well, certainly, we're talking about more like health comorbidities that might be influencing. So this part of your body, again, relies on an intact neurovascular system. So anything that's going to impact nerves, blood flow, muscle health, general fitness, your ability to move your body during sex, your partner's receptivity, and also if they're having any pain, especially women who are perimenopausal or in menopausal transition, their genital tissues are going to be different as well. And so that might create for painful penetrative intercourse, which might also then the partner might be because you care and love for your partner. If they're hurting,
Mm.
that's also going to inhibit from a top-down perspective. When I say top-down, brain, spinal cord, your brain influences these reflexes that we're talking about. Reflexes meaning the erections and ejaculation. So your brain can turn down that reflex or enhance it. And if there's anything that is a threat or protection or defense, whether that's a feeling, a partner's, you think that they're in pain in some way, that's going to dampen all of what's going on here. So, and that's especially more important the older that we get. So the psychosocial factors really matter, and the relational dynamics also.
Thank you for sharing all of that. Before we keep going into kind of the physiology of this, if we could take a sidestep and explore within a couple, what do you see as useful or recommended when there's a couple where there's a mismatch in sexual desire or in how frequently they want to have sex? What do you do in those situations?
Yeah. I'll start by saying that that is completely normal, and probably the majority of couples are in that boat. And often over the course of time, those discrepancies become sort of entrenched. And it's sort of like, oh, well, you're the one who wants it a lot, and I'm the one who really doesn't want it. And it just becomes this source of tension for the couple. And one of the things that's really good to do to begin working with couples is just to remind them that you guys are a team. You guys are on the same team. You have goodwill for each other, and it's reconnecting to that sense of love and positivity and good intention that does exist. And then looking at like, okay, so there's a couple of things that I think come into play, especially in long-term relationships. It's mismatched libidos, but also mismatched erotic styles. And so one person might desire a certain kind of sexual experience, and the other one is like, oh, I'll humor you, but it doesn't turn me on. I'm not really all that interested. And it's another source of conflict. And so these are important things for couples to be able to come to the table with, honestly, to talk about and to get support around, to be able to change the dynamic. And if we're thinking about a tool, so I'll just share for myself. In my couple, I'm the one who has the higher desire than my husband. And we have very different erotic styles as well. And so something that's helpful for me to remember is there's nothing wrong with him wanting it less. It has taken me years to get comfortable with that, truly, and to just be at peace with it. Like, okay, there's nothing that needs to be fixed here, despite my like propensity to want to fix it and change it. But a tool that we can use in this case, especially for the person with the lower libido or less desire, the person that it's harder to get into that place of wanting to get sexual, is for them to think about, okay, what turns me on? What gets me? How do I turn myself on? How do I get aroused? What do I need as like an on-ramp to go from my everyday daily life where I'm doing all these things and then getting into my body in an erotic, sensual, beautiful way? Like sometimes that gap feels really big. And that partner can create a cheat sheet for their other partner with the higher libido that says, okay, well, it would be really helpful to me. Like it will help me if and they just make a list of like the things. And, I have an hour of alone time after the kids are in bed or whatever it is. I mean, getting creative and really thinking about like, what do I need to be nourished as an individual to feel like, oh, I can now transition into a space of eroticism and really like thinking strategically about it and then giving that cheat sheet to your partner, and your partner's like, oh, this is great. It's like a little cheat sheet, a love note, a little thing of permission. And that's just one little nugget that people can do.
That's huge.
Yeah.
So acknowledging it's normal to have a mismatch in desires. Yeah. It's normal to have a mismatch in erotic styles. And from that acknowledgement, how can we work as a team?
Yeah.
And how can we be very frank
Mm-hmm.
and really honest with ourselves and each other without feeling like we need to fix anything about each other?
Yeah. And I think that a piece of this experience of changing the landscape from a landscape of sort of battling each other to a landscape of actually joining and coming together is having a language for it. You know, being able to articulate what's going on inside of us. You know, for some people, sexuality and having sex, engaging in a sexual way is like breathing. It's like water. It is necessary. It is vital. And for other people, it's just not a big deal. They're just like, it maybe sometimes a couple times a month, I'm fine. And to be able to articulate that, you know, and for one person to be like, oh my gosh, twice a month? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I'm starving over here.
Yeah.
And then to be able to talk, okay, well then how can we come together? How many, like, what do you need? You know, do you need space to be your own best lover? I think that's something that is an important piece of the conversation that we don't often talk about in this realm of sexual education. Do we know how to be our own best lovers? Have we had evenings or days with ourselves where we are exploring our bodies in a pleasurable way, with toys, without toys, with music, like giving ourselves the pleasure that we've always wanted to receive and not expecting the other person to do it? Do we know how to do that ourselves?
Cultivating an erotic relationship with ourselves with more intention.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's another thing. So that's a tool for the person with the higher libido.
Yeah.
So their partner might not be interested in the frequency that they're interested in. Okay, great. You've got all this sexual energy in you. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
Use it. There's nothing that says that you can only use it with your partner or that you have to go off and like have this quick little experience. Like you can create a gourmet sexual experience for yourself, you know? And so again, it's having the language to articulate what you need. Yeah. Honey, I know that you're not interested. We had sex last week. We're not going to have it for a little bit. I get it. It's fine. But I'm going to need 3 hours tonight in the guest room. No interruptions.
Please take care of child situation.
And like set up a gorgeous experience for yourself.
Yeah.
Make yourself a playlist. Get some candles. Cover the lips with some scarves. Like
give yourself permission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Just because your partner isn't ready or willing or wanting to receive your sexual advances and energy doesn't mean that it has to just stop there.
Or be squashed. Okay. Do you have anything you want to add to this aspect of the conversation when there's a mismatch in partnership?
A couple of things came to mind, and you said that so eloquently, so
You
I don't
did.
know how I can top that. But sexual discrepancies or sexual desires can often change and evolve as the couple shifts. So the longer that you're in partnership, in the beginning of the relationship, one might have been the initiator, the one with the higher drive, so to speak. And then as the relationship evolves, then you see that the roles switch sometimes, right? And for both individuals, that might pose for a challenge because, again, there's like this unset expectation of like, hey, what's going on here? And then insecurities settle in, etc. And it really does come down to, Faith, as you were saying, is conversations around like, you know, yes, sometimes couples can find themselves in a rut. Life happens, kids, it's just routine. And we miss and lose the novelty and the surprise and like building that responsive desire because maybe earlier on in the relationship, it was really spontaneous and there was so much more excitement, etc. So I think it's understanding that it's normal for things to kind of maybe be a little more subdued, but that it does take a little bit of effort from both individuals to spice things up again, to bring in playfulness and fun, like basic things. Kissing, for example, making out. I will ask people, like, when's the last time you all made out? Like, when was the last time you actually just made out with each other? Oh, I can't even tell you the last time that happened. I'm like, well, it's, and then the conversations are right away like, let's go into intercourse. Like, no, that's just one aspect of a sexual experience, and it doesn't have to mean the main course. In fact, all this other stuff in the relationship and the simmering and the affection and the holding and the caressing, playing with each other again and allowing each other to remember those pleasurable hot experiences that y'all had together in your past and your sexual experiences. We often forget because it's happened, life goes on, and then like if I have people just sit with like, remember when was the last time you had good sex? Why was it good? Bring to mind all that you remember, right? And they're thinking about their partner in a fond way, and they're remembering how they like connected with them or how they first met, and that like ignites a feeling of like, oh yeah, right? So it does take some effort, and I do think that sharing in that initiation, especially if someone does have more drive, higher drive, like taking turns to initiate sexuality or sexual experiences, like sharing in that, so that one person doesn't feel like it's just my job or my role, but offering both individuals to share in that space to bridge that sexual desire gap. And I love your idea of the writing down, here's what turns me on, or this is what I like. And that reminds me of another exercise or activity that couples can do, is just write down those ideas and put them in a bowl, and each one has just an individual color. And then one week, one person pulls out of that, and you discuss like, can we explore with this tonight? Have a date, have a date with each other or with yourself. And so it just reminded me of just like playfulness and
Totally.
bridging communication.
I think it's so important because life is busy. No matter who we are, life is busy, and I think that this can get tabled to the back, and then all of a sudden we're like, where did it go? What? Why is there a chasm between me and my partner? And one way, like, there's two things that we can do that are sort of like gentle little invitations to start to bring the closeness back together. One is hug each other every day until you relax. So I invite everybody in this room, everybody who's watching, to just imagine that hug. And it's not a perfunctory hug. It's not a quick hug. It's hugging until both of you have kind of had that sigh of like, where you relax. That kind of hug once a day. And then to your point about making out, kiss for at least 6 seconds once a day. A 6-second kiss.
Linger.
That's like, it's not a peck. It's not a brief see you later or hello. It's like, oh, there's something here. And that begins it begins the simmer. It kind of keeps it going. And those are just two little things. It really doesn't take long, and they're very pleasurable, I promise.
And sorry, I have a frog in my throat, so to speak.
Frog to come out.
That's the saying, isn't it? I just had stage fright that I invented a saying that didn't exist. No, but creativity, safety, lingering, slowing down, cultivating collaboration, exploring how things change over time, and being careful to be curious about the stories we develop about ourselves and our partners so that we don't calcify in them and get stuck.
Oh my gosh, I have another thing.
Yeah, what is it?
Can I share it?
Please.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So another thing that is really helpful for us that sparked as you were just talking is being curious about our partners. When we're in long-term partnership with people, if we're in partnership with people, it can just be like, oh, I know you. This is how you are. And it's like this like dug in vibe. And so the invitation, often what I do with clients is just holding the space of curiosity and presence. So being able to have a dyad with your partner where one person speaks and the other person listens, and then you switch. And the dyads can be simple, like, what do you desire sexually? That's a deeper dive. You can always start with something simpler, like, what do you need to feel nourished? And then just listen to what they say. And then once they peter out after talking for like 40 seconds, you ask the question again. What do you need to feel nourished? And you just give them your presence and listening. And then you can repeat it back. And so there's ways that I think we can get lost in the sameness and forget that this is an entire universe in front of us and another human being, and they're unique and
changing.
And they're changing.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so to be able to have these experiences and conversations with each other where we're actually really seeing them.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's what brings you nourishment.
Yeah.
Oh, that's that's what you desire sexually.
Now, which might be
Right.
different than what it was 6 months or
Right.
6 years or 20 years
And
ago.
it's not about like, oh, let's fix it and go do it. It's
Yeah.
not that. It's just about witnessing each other.
And connecting.
Mm-hmm.
That's a beautiful segue, actually, to another question we have here, which is, if someone feels that their sex life is good but repetitive, and if they've been in a partnership for a long time, how can you spice it up? How can you keep sex, exciting? How can you keep your romantic life new, right? Yes, I guess. What are you going to pull out of the basket?
Well, first, this is great because there's to what you were saying, Faith, about those questions, very powerful questions, and being curious about your partner, I think, is an emotional connection, that sensuality, like who really are you? Like, what are you thinking? And what would it be like to answer this question from my partner's perspective? Like, I'm putting yourself in their shoes. There's a card deck game. So if you're into card games, it's called Skin Deep. That's the company. Honest X. It's an amazing card game that couples can play to reignite, be curious. They have questions on each of these cards, a huge deck, and you play and you ask questions. I think it's just a beautiful way to break the ice so you don't have to feel like you have to come up with questions. But yeah, spend time with each other playing a card game. So that's one of them. And Esther Perel she's a sex therapist.
She's fabulous.
And she has a card deck as well that she just created. So I do those two resources for sure, like opening dialogue and communication. But for like other things that you can bring in as far as novelty, certainly fantasy can be one of those. Get to know each other's fantasies. I mean, not all fantasies have to be disclosed, and it's okay to bring your fantasies with you into a partner's sexual experience. Some of the people that I work with often feel really ashamed and embarrassed. Like, I like thinking about this. I know my partner doesn't necessarily prefer this in a sexual way, but I bring it into our sessions and it really enhances my sexual experience. And that's okay. Like, those things are totally okay. So there's sexual resources and aids. And I have others here as well that I'd like to just share as far as like bringing novelty. These are different kinds of vibrators, and I brought some that are like less, maybe more ambiguous and maybe less intimidating. The first one is called Fin. And it's a finger. Fin is a finger vibrator. So it vibrates and it has a nice little tether, so you don't even have to kind of hold on to it. It attaches to your finger pads like that, and it vibrates, and it can be used anywhere on the body. So again, very low, different pulsations, but low profile. Also, I'm always thinking about function and accessibility. So for those that might have difficulty gripping objects such as a lawn vibrator, might be too heavy, this is such a great resource for folks to have as far as having vibration, but being more accessible and mobile with them. This is called the Magic Wand. Again, it looks very like a generic body massager. It could be used anywhere, not internally. So please don't put this inside any orifices in the body, but external massager right here. Different pulsations, it's wireless, and you both can play with it. And then we get into things like more specific. This one is versatile. So this one is for originally for those that have vaginas. So this would go into the vagina. This would go over the clitoris. Both of these vibrate. So if there's penetration, or let's say someone who has a penis is penetrating and they're having difficulty with erections, vibration can help to activate nerve endings and bring more blood flow to the organ. And so this is something of a tool that I often suggest to folks to use. And also versatile because it's flexible, so it can be used as a stroking massager if you're like doing partner masturbation, for example. This could also be a tool that can be used in different ways. And lastly is specifically for the guys, but also could be for their partner. It is a vibrator, believe it or not. Yes, there are vibrators for men. This is actually the most powerful and the most sleek in design as far as the vibrators out there. I get no kickbacks for this product or any of these products, just FYI for disclosure. But you would put the penis inside here, lubricate, and then that would be a massager, essentially a stroker, vibrator. So
What's the name of that brand for people who want to know?
So this is Manta by Fun Factory.
Okay.
This is Magic Wand by Magic Wand.
Okay.
This is We Vibe. And that one's Finn. And this one is by Mystery Vibe. So this is a couples. It can be a couples toy that can be used in many different ways because it has pivoting. It's bendable and it vibrates. So it could be used for men, for women, anally, vaginally, together. Yeah. So fun.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Just went to the adult toy shop.
We did.
And Baha Boo, by the way, is a great one in town.
Okay. in the posting on our website, as well as on the Facebook and YouTube, maybe YouTube, we can link into some of this. I don't know about the toys, so to speak, but for sure the cards with the questions, the Esther Perel deck and the Skin Deep deck, so that if you're interested in looking at it later, you can. And do you have anything you want to add?
Oh my gosh, honey, are you kidding? Do we have time?
Let's keep it to like a minute or two.
Okay.
So we can move through all of it and then we can circle back if we have time.
Okay, sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
What do you want to add?
I will add a game that you can do with your partner, and it's map your pleasure. So it brings you back to that beginner's mind, that sense of like, who are you and what do you like? And who am I and what do I like? Often we just go straight to the things that we know work and we forget that the entire body is an instrument of pleasure. And the question is, how do we play it? And so the invitation with your partner, or you can also do this by yourself, is to bring different kinds of touch to their body and ask, and you literally can take notes and ask them on a scale of 1 to 5, how pleasurable is this? And so you can bring touch, like light touch. You can bring your tongue with light touch. You can bring scratches. Do they like scratches? So you're thinking about like different kinds, different textures of touch. What brings your partner pleasure? So you can also think about it in terms of elements. The element of earth would be like, do they like to be touched with this deep sensual rubbing? Okay, they like it in their thighs and in their back, but they don't like it in their arms. Oh, interesting. Huh, okay. And then when you think about fire, you think about scratches. Do they enjoy that? Do they like pinching? Do they like
all of the other kinds of touch?
I'm trying to think,
yeah.
what else is fire touch? Oh, smacking and spanking. Do they enjoy that sensation? Oh, they enjoy it on this part of their body, but not that part of their body. It's a fascinating thing that you can do. And it's often very illuminating to be like, oh my gosh, my inner wrists are like super erogenous and I never knew. You would never know unless you took the time to explore.
Pleasure mapping each other.
Yeah.
That's a really neat idea. I don't know that anybody normally does that in a relationship with notes.
It's again, sex education. I know.
But should, apparently.
But like you do it the first time, sort of in a scientific way.
Yeah.
And then you have learned your partner's body completely differently. So that next time you're together and you're creating this like erotic, beautiful, like I don't know what the right word
atmosphere,
is.
space.
I'm thinking of music, like a
dance.
It's not a symphony. I was like, it's not an orchestra. It's a symphony. When you're creating an erotic symphony together, you remember, oh, behind her ear with my tongue. Oh, like on the lower back. Like who knows? Everybody's different and everybody's likes are different. So it's up to us to take the time to devote this kind of attention and presence to ourselves and to our partners to learn.
And there's no pressure to perform, which is the best part about that. There's no performance pressure or worry or anxiety that things have to look or be or finish in a particular way. It's very relaxed, and you have to be relaxed in order to feel aroused and have your physiology work for you.
Yeah. There's something I want to come back to that you said earlier to that point. I do think that we've been taught, or we have this expectation in our society that like the experience starts here. We just follow the arousal, we have an orgasm, and then we're done. And if it doesn't look like that, then somehow it's not good enough. And for me, when I look back on the most incredible sex of my life, neither of us orgasmed. It went on for, I mean, not a clitoral orgasm or a ejaculatory orgasm for him. It just went on for hours and waves and waves and waves of pleasure. And it had nothing to do with orgasm. So to that point of performance, like it's about connection, it's about intimacy, it's about exploring these realms of pleasure that we can find when we take the time.
That was beautiful, both of you. Okay, so from the gamut of having tools and toys and questions that prompt us to think about this from a new perspective and from a new angle, all the way into activities that we do together to explore each other in new ways. Before we start to wrap up, there are two different questions that are kind of more on the challenging side of sex and sexuality. So, what about when sex hurts? What are several strategies a couple can utilize if sex hurts? What do you have?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah.
Because like, first it's, well, why does it hurt? So from my lens as a public practitioner, for men and for women is, there's a function here. So, and sex should never hurt. I just want to say that sex should never hurt unless you want it to. Because there are folks that really enjoy bringing a little bit of that painful pleasure into their experience. As long as things are safe and their tissues are safe, that's great. And that's totally fine. But if you're not intending sex to hurt, then we need to look at the underlying causes that might be contributing to that. So whether that is changes within the vulval vaginal tissue as women get older, that maybe there's some dryness, decreased flexibility in vaginal tissue, then we would approach that situation with, first of all, taking, for men and for women, taking the pressure to perform or to have any type of penetrative sex off the table, and to reconnect and rekindle with safe, pleasurable experiences. Because as Faith, you were saying, bodily protective responses are going to kick into gear, and they're going to kick into gear subconsciously, non-consciously, because of the context of which that reoccurring negative, unpleasant, and painful experience is occurring in. So immediately muscles are going to tense, vaginal muscles are going to tense, pelvic floor muscles in around the penis are going to tense, nerves get crabby, blood flow gets constricted, etc. So it's, let's not go to the aspects of sexuality that maybe are painful, but let's start at a place that feels safe and explore each other's body, which is such a great example of how to pleasure map, find areas that do feel good. What can we engage in and still connect and be intimate? That's really important. So safety and reducing potentially negative recurring triggering events that continue the sexual pain cycle going on and on and on. Since I mentioned vulval vaginal tissue, and this is again whether it's vulval vaginal tissue or anal tissue that hurts, we have tools or trainers or tools or sexual resources depending on who you're talking to. They're called dilators. So these are vaginal, and there are specific ones that are rectal as well, and they come in different sizes that gradually increase in length and also circumference, but they're silicone and they're flexible. You would use this with lubricant. And again, the point isn't here to be sterile or mechanical around sex. We never introduce things like this, even from a medical perspective. I know they often are just given to people or told to do without thinking about the arousal elements, the pleasure elements, bringing their partner into these situations and bridging safety and pleasure together. They're often just told, here, go ahead, stretch your vagina out and you'll be fine. Use these 4 to 6 weeks or whatever and see ya. Sad. It's incredibly sad, but there's more to this experience than what I just described. So it's incrementally allowing a stretch of those tissues and using these resources, solo and or partnered, to reduce tissue tension and pain, increase blood flow, and to help regain function with intimacy. Because again, we're talking about function and it should not be painful. And so I'm always trying to bridge again that pleasure and arousal, if there's sexual pain, to help minimize and reduce that, but also find opportunities to expand their sexual pleasure while bridging a therapeutic process. So these are vaginal trainers or dilators And there's also ones that are specifically for the rectum as well.
And I'll interject just for a minute because it's 7 o'clock already. I don't know how that happened. This conversation is much. There's so much to the expanse of what we could discuss, and what I feel like we still want to ask you to. You know, to respect everyone's time, though, I'd love to bring it down to just like this last little thread of, are there any other resources that you would point people to if they're having challenges around orgasm or pain or difficulty in that regard, like a website or your websites, where they can go, since we don't have time to delve into that aspect during the discussion?
Oh my gosh.
And
I would be happy to connect with people, but I'll just say, like, if you're feeling drawn to learn more in this realm, welcome to the journey. Like, it is long, it is beautiful. There are plenty of people out there who are very well trained. And I'd be happy to be one of them, supporting people. faithloves.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, please.
Dr. Lori Brotto has a book, I believe it's called Mindfulness or Mindfulness with Sex, and it is female geared, but there's a lot of like mindfulness dilator programs and using dilators in a sensual way and kind of going through the anatomy, etc. And the resource Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski is also a really great one for both men and women to read, honestly. So those would be some of those resources. I have also a ton of resources that I've collected over a decade of work that I've been doing this in on my website under resources, from products to websites to apps to practitioners. I'm a practitioner who specializes in this area. So if sex is hurting, certainly check out my website, drsuzieg.com. We do work. We're a men's pelvic health clinic, and for the people who love them as well. So.
And there's information about all three of the Integrative Family Medicine of Asheville Clinic, as well as Dr. Susie Gronsky's clinic. You have your cards on the table as well if you came in person. And if you didn't and you're joining virtually, I'll put links into our website posting for this event, as well as where we'll have the video on our YouTube and Facebook channels. I want to thank you both so much for your openness, authenticity, expertise. Thank you for coming and sharing everything you did this evening.